my question, Alex Ballinger. How many migrants are you willing to take in your constituency? Because this is the other problem with the policy. You've got lots of hand-wringing Labour MPs like your colleague Rachel Maskell saying refugees welcome, please come, but actually not in my backyard.
If we had a disused military barracks in my constituency that was the most appropriate accommodation for asylum seekers, I would be the first person to say.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Julian Discourse. Before we dive in, please make sure to like and subscribe. Have you ever noticed how the politicians who most loudly demand that we welcome unvetted migrants are almost never the ones volunteering to house them in their own neighborhoods? Watch what happens when Camilla Tominey completely corners a Labour MP over the government's absurd new plan to spend more taxpayer money deliberately moving migrants into middle-class areas, purely to fulfill Andy Burnham's twisted sense of class warfare. Instead of defending the cost to the taxpayer, watch him squirm, dodge, and completely fall apart when asked how many migrants he is personally willing to take in his own constituency.
And the numbers of the crossing, we will still need some asylum accommodation.
Yes.
And
so it should be as cheap as possible, not in middle-class areas where it's more expensive.
It should be in the most appropriate type of building or structure, and I think former military barracks are one of those more appropriate types of buildings.
But that wasn't quite what the Prime Minister said. You're kind of giving a good gloss on it. He's basically saying that the middle classes should share the burden, and it's not fair to only put these migrants in deprived areas.
I think that's exactly what he said, yeah.
Yeah, but he also said, so he was then told, well, hang on, I think by Chris Hope in an interview on GB News, but it's going to be more expensive. And he said, well, it might be more expensive, but we just need to do it like this. Because basically he's engaging in a form of class warfare. He's the king of the north. He wants to make sure that we're all levelled up. The south must also suffer. I mean, what's he trying to do? Spread the suffering.
I don't think that's accurate. But he is right that the poorest areas shouldn't face the full burden of housing asylum seekers.
But how much should it cost? Surely it should be cost efficient.
It doesn't cost more money than some of these very expensive contracts that were signed by the Conservatives when they were set up to put people in public buildings that are already there.
But journalistic research does suggest that if you put migrants in more middle-class areas where rents are statistically higher...
Not in military barracks.
Yes, but this is my central point, Alex Ballinger. The Prime Minister was told it could cost more to push migrants into middle-class areas, and he said, yes, it might, but, you know, we still need to do it. So he's prioritising a degree of class warfare over economic literacy.
I don't think he's doing anything to do with class warfare. I think it's all about making sure the burden is shared fairly across the country.
Even though it costs the taxpayer more.
Even if these military barracks are in wealthier areas, that we should be looking at putting them in the most appropriate accommodation.
Alex Ballinger, even if it costs the taxpayer more...
I mean, cost is a factor, but fairness is also a factor.
Well, hang on, but it's not going to be fair.
We can't put everyone in Blackpool, we can't put everyone in Birmingham. They've got to be spread across the country.
First of all, it's not fair, according to the taxpayer, to fund people who have come here illegally. Second of all, it's not fair to burden the taxpayer with a higher bill simply so Andy Burnham can flex his levelling up muscle. But the Prime Minister himself has accepted it might cost more money to house the migrants in so-called nicer areas, but he wants to do it anyway, because he's trying to prove some kind of king of the north point. There's no other interpretation as why he wants to do it. He's either trying to prove a class point or he's trying to spread misery across the country. Which is it?
I think we could take the approach of the Conservatives and load as many asylum seekers into hotels in the poorest communities in the country, and we're seeing all the protests and all the problems that we had.
You're making out that there aren't already hotels in nice areas. There aren't there? There's already migrant accommodation. If you look at the map, I'm sorry, it's complete misrepresentation to say they're only in deprived areas. They're in all sorts of areas. They're in nice leafy parts of Epsom. They're in Milton Keynes. They're north, they're south. Why doesn't the Prime Minister put his money where his mouth is and open a migrant centre in Makerfield?
I think it's appropriate, as we're doing, to move people out of town centres and into military accommodation.
How many migrants would you like to be housed in Halesowen?
Well, we've just closed the final migrant hotel in Dudley earlier this year. That was one of the successes of the government. It's very unpopular in the local community.
OK, so you've got room for more?
I think it's appropriate that we bear down on the number of people that are crossing, so there are fewer migrants everywhere.
Answer my question, Alex Ballinger. How many migrants are you willing to take in your constituency? Because this is the other problem with the policy. You've got lots of hand-wringing Labour MPs like your colleague Rachel Maskell saying refugees welcome, please come, but actually Not in my backyard.
If we had a disused military barracks in my constituency that was the most appropriate accommodation for asylum seekers, I would be the first person to say that is where we should be putting
And would
our
it be
asylum
more
seekers.
appropriate, for instance, as we're going to speak to the campaigners in Piddington, would it be more appropriate to have them in Halesowen than it would be neighbouring a village of 314 people? It's not quite right, is it, to have a village of 314 people, then have a migrant accommodation centre opened literally next door to them, which is going to quadruple their own population with largely young migrant men from overseas.
There is a process that's going on in Piddington, but I think the principle that we should be having more asylum seekers in purpose-built accommodation, in military barracks, wherever they are in the country, rather than hotels in the town centre, is a good one.
Yes.
Is a principle that the public supports and will cost us less in the long run than the system that we inherited from the Conservatives.
And briefly, on the Makerfield point...
There will always be people that would prefer these sites not to be in their area. And I sympathise, and I wouldn't want a large centre in my area either.
Yes.
But the principle has to cover the entire country, and it shouldn't
yes,
be
no,
targeted
because we need to go.
in the poorest areas.
But quick yes, no. He should put his money where his mouth is and open a migrant centre in Makerfield,
there is
shouldn't he?
appropriate accommodation in Makerfield, just as there is anywhere else, that is where we should be citing the asylum seekers.
Alex Ballinger, thank you very much for your time today. Good to see you in the studio rather than down the line, because we always think...
Welcome back to reality. What you just watched is the real-time exposure of an elite political class that treats public safety and border control like a petty game of class warfare. When Camilla Tominey directly confronts Labour MP Alex Ballinger about the government's plan to deliberately house unvetted migrants in middle-class and rural areas, the justification isn't that it's cheaper or more efficient. The justification is Andy Burnham's socialist idea of fairness. The establishment is openly admitting they are willing to spend significantly more of your hard-earned taxpayer money just to spread the misery around. Let's bring some actual facts and dates to the table, because the media desperately wants to ignore the sheer scale of this crisis. By early 2024, the UK Home Office admitted it was spending an astronomical $8 million a day just to house asylum seekers in hotels. To supposedly cut costs, the government began pushing migrants into disused military bases, places like RAF Scampton in Lincolnshire and RAF Wethersfield in Essex. But as Tominey rightly pointed out, dropping a massive accommodation centre into a tiny rural village of 300 people doesn't just change the character of the town. It completely overwhelms the local infrastructure, literally quadrupling the local population overnight, with predominantly young, undocumented men from overseas. But the most revealing moment of this entire exchange is the sheer, undeniable hypocrisy of the political class. Notice exactly how Ballinger operates. He confidently defends the policy of burdening local communities in the name of fairness. But the absolute second Tominey asks him how many migrants he is willing to house in his own constituency of Halesowen, he instantly panics. This exchange matters because it fundamentally shatters the social contract. The establishment is deliberately engineering a system that forces the public to bankroll the decline of their own neighborhoods. They preach about compassion and shared burdens from insulated television studios, but they never have to live next door to the consequences of their open border ideology. Everyday citizens are exhausted by an elite that demands their tax money, tells them what to think, and actively refuses to secure the borders. They are prioritizing a radical political narrative over the safety of the British public, and voters are no longer buying the spin.